The trouble started the day I locked my gate for good. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I heard the unmistakable clack of cheap heels on concrete. Karrenna Albright, president of the HOA, storming up my driveway like she was invading Normandy. Stanley Whitmore. She shouted, pointing at my brand new wrought iron gate that now stood closed across the road behind my house. "You can't just block that road. It violates community access bylaws." I didn't even flinch. "Karrenna, that road isn't community property. It's mine, always has been." "Deed says it plain as day." She scoffed like I'd just told her the moon was made of cheese. "That road connects to the walking trail. It's been open for years. You can't just decide to lock it." "Well, I just did." Karrenna's eyes narrowed. "This woman had a way of making you feel like you owed her money every time she opened her mouth. I dealt with her before fines for my mailbox being too rustic, complaints about my truck being an eyesore, and once, a warning because my dog barked during daylight hours. But this gate. This one really got under her skin. The back road behind my house runs 100 feet before it hits the woods, then tapers off into an old maintenance trail the HOA never maintained. Years ago, I bought that strip of land from the county when they auctioned off unused parcels. I paid cash, had it surveyed, documented, and recorded. HOA knew it, too. They just never cared until now. 2 weeks ago, some teenagers had been cutting through my yard at night, tossing beer cans. I warned them. Then I put up cameras. Then I put up the gate. Simple, right? Not to Karrenna. She came back that afternoon with a clipboard and a smug-looking man in a blazer. Phil something, the HOA's legal advisor. They walked right up to my locked gate, rattled it, and started snapping pictures. I watched from my porch until they left, shaking their heads like I'd just committed treason. Next morning, a letter showed up. Certified. HOA letterhead. Cease and desist, remove unauthorized obstruction of community access path or face daily fines of $200. I chuckled. Then I flipped the page and saw they'd already billed me $800 retroactively. That's when I knew this wasn't about access. This was about control. I called my lawyer, dug up my deed, and made copies. Then I drove straight to the county recorder's office and got a fresh certified copy of the land records. I wasn't about to let Karrenna bully me like she had countless others in this neighborhood. That weekend, I installed a second lock on the gate and a camera right above it. Then I waited. 3 days after the gate stayed locked, I came home to find 3 orange notices stapled to the wooden posts on either side, one from the HOA, one from the Neighborhood Compliance Committee, which I was pretty sure was just Karrenna and her dog walking buddies, and one claiming to be from the town zoning office. That last one caught my eye. I pulled it down and studied the seal, looked halfway legit until I saw the signature. Deputy Inspector L. Garrison. There's no L. Garrison in zoning. I know that because my cousin Amanda works there, has for 22 years. I drove straight to her office and dropped the paper on her desk. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and said, "Whoever wrote this is either an idiot or trying to impersonate municipal staff." I asked her to put that in writing. She typed up an affidavit, signed it, and even had her boss notarize it. Back at home, I added a copy to the folder I'd started collecting deeds, surveys, photos, and now forged government correspondence. I wasn't planning to go nuclear yet, but I wanted the warhead ready. That night, I reviewed the camera footage from the gate. At exactly 2:14 a.m., a figure in a hoodie ducked under the lens, tried yanking the chain, then disappeared into the woods. At 2:16, a second figure shorter, stockier approached from the trail side and pulled out bolt cutters. The camera caught the glint as they raised the tool, then something must have startled them. They froze, looked up, and bolted. I paused the frame. The shorter one had a reflective vest on. Bright yellow. Printed on the back. Community Safety Patrol HOA. I sent the still to a friend of mine at the sheriff's office. Deputy Ray, who'd helped me deal with a trespasser situation last year, he called me an hour later. "Stan, that's impersonation and attempted property damage." "You want us to open a report?" I told him to hold off. just for now. I had a better idea. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office, really just a converted tool shed at the end of the cul-de-sac, and walked in holding a manila envelope. Karrenna looked up from her desk, flanked by two board members I recognized. Gail, who once tried to fine a neighbor for planting daisies instead of pansies, and Barry, who thought speed bumps were a communist plot. "Stanley," she said, as if she'd been expecting me. "Here to resolve this gate matter?" "No," I said, placing the envelope on her desk. "Here to let you know that I've documented every attempt your board has made to fabricate violations, impersonate local authorities, and tamper with private property." Gail bristled. "That's a serious accusation." "It is," I said. "So's forging a zoning notice, so's sneaking onto my land in the middle of the night." Karrenna's eyes flicked to the envelope but didn't touch it. Barry shifted uncomfortably. "Now, let's not escalate things. Maybe we can revisit the trail access issue and no," I cut in. "We're past maybe. I'm giving you a choice. Back off, rescind the fines, issue a written apology for the forged notice, or I hand this to the sheriff, the county clerk, and the local paper." "All of it?" Karrenna's voice dropped a register. "You wouldn't." I leaned forward. "I already did." That was only partially true. I hadn't sent the full packet yet, but I had emailed a summary to Deputy Ray and the local reporter who covered city council meetings. Both had replied with interest. I left the office without another word. Let them stew. By that evening, my mailbox had a new letter. This one was handwritten, not HOA letterhead, just plain paper. It read, "We're willing to discuss terms privately. Please attend the emergency board meeting tomorrow." I had no intention of playing their game in private. Instead, I sent an email to every homeowner in the neighborhood. I attached the deed to the backroad, the affidavit from zoning, and the still image of the reflective vest. Then I wrote, "If your HOA dues are being spent on breaking into your neighbor's property in the middle of the night, maybe it's time we talked about who's really violating community standards." Within 3 hours, I had 22 replies, all supportive. 4 people said they'd had mysterious fines on their records too. One couple had been threatened with foreclosure over a fence they installed with written approval. Another said Karrenna had added late fees to their dues despite paying on time. I wasn't just fighting for my gate anymore. The next day, I called a meeting of my own. Not at the HOA office, at the park pavilion near the playground. I printed copies of everything and laid them out on a folding table. Forged notices, screen captures, a timeline of events, and a list of violations the HOA had committed. I even brought a portable speaker and played the audio from one of my cameras, a grainy clip of Gail muttering, "Let's just cut the damn thing," before backing off. More than 30 residents showed up. Some were cautious, some angry, but all curious. I let them read. Let them talk. Let them realize they weren't alone. Then I handed out a petition. Motion to hold a recall election for HOA board leadership due to misconduct, fraud, and abuse of authority. 28 signatures by sunset. Later that night, 2 squad cars pulled up outside my house. Not with sirens, just quiet and professional. Deputy Ray stepped out with another officer and asked if we could take a statement inside. They had reviewed the footage. Matched the vest to a uniform issued by the HOA. Traced the forged zoning notice back to a printer registered to the community office. They weren't there to arrest anyone. Yet. But they were opening an investigation. And they wanted everything I had. I gave them the entire file, plus the encrypted backups I'd stored on 2 flash drives. Ray looked up as he took them. "You do realize if this goes to court, you might be the key witness in a fraud and conspiracy case?" I nodded. "Good," he said, "because from what we're seeing, this isn't just about a gate. This looks like years of intimidation, misuse of funds, and possibly wire fraud." I walked them out and stood on my porch as they drove off. The gate stayed locked. The camera light blinked steadily, and for the first time in weeks, the path behind my house was completely silent. By Thursday morning, a notice went out to every mailbox in the neighborhood, this one official, on county letterhead. It announced a joint investigation between the sheriff's office and the district attorney's office into potential criminal misconduct by members of the Evergreen Bluff Homeowners Association board. The notice wasn't vague. It named names: Karrenna Albright, Gail Densmore, Barry Langston, and two other board members, Ronnie Spence and Marla Keene, were being investigated for falsifying municipal documents, misappropriating HOA funds, and attempted trespass with intent to damage private property. The neighborhood lit up. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years were now stopping at mailboxes, sharing copies of the notice, and comparing stories. I could hardly walk my dog without someone pulling me aside to tell me something they'd remembered. A strange fee, an unexplained charge, a threatening letter they'd paid just to avoid conflict. That afternoon, I got a call from the county DA's office. A young assistant prosecutor named Lee Turlow asked if I'd be willing to sit for a recorded deposition. I agreed, and we scheduled it for the following morning at the county courthouse. When I arrived, Lee was already waiting with a clipboard and 2 file boxes. She was sharp-eyed, mid-30s, and asked questions like she'd already read the answers. The deposition lasted nearly 3 hours. I detailed every incident, every document, every late-night visit to the locked gate. I handed over the original flash drives and offered to testify in court if necessary. As I was packing up to leave, she asked one last question. "Do you know if any HOA board members personally profited from fines or enforcement actions?" I paused. "Not directly. But I know Karrenna owns the landscaping company that gets all the HOA contracts, and Barry's nephew runs the security patrol that started showing up after dark." She nodded slowly, wrote something down, and thanked me for coming in. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Deputies arrived at the HOA office with search warrants. Neighbors watched from porches and driveways as officers carried out file boxes, hard drives, and even the office printer. Word spread that Karrenna had tried to block the search and ended up being physically escorted off the premises. Not arrested yet, but the optics weren't great. The following day, the Evergreen Bluff Facebook group, which had always been tightly moderated by the HOA, was abruptly set to public. Someone, likely a board member turned whistleblower, posted screenshots of internal emails. The messages showed coordination between board members to pressure residents with fines, delay responses to appeals, and approve vendor contracts without competitive bidding. One message, dated 6 months earlier, read, "If we can get Whitmore to remove the gate, it opens access for Phase 3 expansion. We'll never get approval if that road stays private." So that was it. They hadn't just been annoyed by the gate. They'd been actively trying to access land for development. My land. The expansion they were after was tied to a shady deal with a construction company out of state. The same company that had quietly bought 3 adjacent lots at auction 2 months prior. The dots connected fast. Karrenna and her allies had been trying to force my gate open not for community access, but to access property for a high-density housing project that would have tripled the population of our quiet neighborhood. And they needed that old service road to secure the permits. I wasn't just in their way, I was the only thing stopping them. That evening, Lee Turlow called again. Her tone was different this time, measured but urgent. "We're filing charges in the morning. Multiple counts: fraud, conspiracy to defraud, attempted criminal trespass, and forgery. We may need you back for the preliminary hearing." I agreed. By the next morning, it was all over local news. A segment on Channel 9 showed footage of Karrenna being taken into custody outside her home. Gail was arrested later that day at a bridge club meeting. Barry turned himself in through his lawyer. The others followed. The news also revealed something I hadn't known. The HOA had been funneling a portion of fine revenue into a discretionary fund that paid for consulting services. One of those consultants was Karrenna's sister-in-law, who lived 3 states away and had never once set foot in Evergreen Bluff. The discretionary fund had paid out over $60,000 in 2 years. That weekend, the neighborhood held a community meeting at the park. Not an official HOA meeting, just residents gathering to figure out what came next. No one sat at the head of the table. There was no gavel, no agenda. Just folding chairs, open dialogue, and a big whiteboard someone brought from their garage. I spoke up only once. All I wanted was some peace and the right to protect what I legally own. I didn't plan on any of this, but I'm glad it happened, because now we know. A woman in the back stood up. Her name was June. She'd been fined over $800 for having a front yard tomato garden. "I think we should dissolve the board entirely," she said, "at least until we can figure out how to rebuild this from the ground up." There was a long silence. Then someone clapped, then another. Then everyone. A petition went around to suspend HOA operations temporarily and appoint an independent financial auditor. A retired accountant named Walter volunteered to oversee it. He'd lived in the neighborhood for 25 years and never once attended an HOA function until now. By Monday, the county froze the HOA's accounts pending a full audit. The gate, still locked, still mine, and no one's tried to cut it since. I added a new sign though, not aggressive, just clear. "This road is private property. Access requires written permission. Violators will be recorded and prosecuted." The next week, a new resident moved in down the street. Young couple just married. The husband jogged past my house one morning and slowed to wave. "You the guy with the gate?" he asked. "Yeah, good. That was the first thing our realtor told us. Said this neighborhood's finally got someone who doesn't back down." I laughed. "Glad to be of service." He nodded and jogged off. Later that day, I got a letter from the county. Not another notice, this one was commendation. For assisting in the exposure of an ongoing criminal enterprise affecting multiple jurisdictions. Apparently, the HOA's fraudulent practices weren't just limited to Evergreen Bluff. The same board members had ties to 2 other associations in neighboring towns, both of which were now under investigation. The dominoes were falling, and I had no plans to stop them, not anymore. 2 weeks passed, and Evergreen Bluff felt like a neighborhood waking up from a long, strange sleep. Without the constant undercurrent of fear, no more arbitrary warnings, taped to garage doors, or unexplained fees showing up in online portals. People began to notice things they'd ignored for years. The community bulletin board, once dominated by HOA announcements and passive-aggressive reminders about pet leash compliance, had been cleared and covered with actual community news. A lost cat reunited with its owner, a garage sale on Elmridge, a flyer for a neighborhood potluck. I'd been staying out of the spotlight since the arrests. My days were quieter now. I finished rebuilding the old split-rail fence near the woods, and when I drove into town, I didn't get the usual curt nods or awkward glances. People stopped me, thanked me. One guy even offered to mow my lawn for free. I declined, but appreciated the gesture. Then, out of nowhere, the first real twist hit. A plain manila envelope arrived from the county civil records department. No return address, just a stamped seal and my name typed clean across the front. Inside was a copy of a quitclaim deed dated 7 months earlier. It transferred a narrow sliver of land at the end of my private road, the very edge that touched the trailhead, to Evergreen Bluff Development Trust. It had been signed by someone claiming to be me. The signature wasn't even close. I drove it straight to the county registrar. The clerk, a wiry woman named Faye, pulled up the transaction record, her brow furrowed. "This was filed by a courier," she said. "Same day as 3 others, all tied to that trust. Already flagged in our system for review." I asked who filed the paperwork. She gave me a name I didn't recognize, Lorraine Finch. I asked if she worked for the HOA. Faye shook her head. "No, but she's listed on the Articles of Incorporation for the trust." I headed to the county recorder's office and requested the full records on Evergreen Bluff Development Trust. It was a shell company, registered out of a UPS box in another county. The listed agent, Karrenna's brother-in-law. The same one whose name had been buried in those leaked emails. They had tried to steal my land on paper. That changed everything. I called Lee Turlow from the DA's office. She listened without interrupting, then asked me to bring the documents in immediately. When I arrived, she didn't waste time. "This isn't just fraud," she said. "This is felony-grade identity theft tied to a land acquisition conspiracy. If they used forged deeds to transfer property for profit, we're talking about real estate wire fraud." That's federal. By the end of the week, the FBI was involved. An agent named Marcus Bell met me at the county courthouse. He was direct and methodical. He asked for every scrap of documentation I had, then laid out what they'd already uncovered. Similar forged deeds had been filed in 2 neighboring associations, each targeting parcels that could connect to future development. Every one of them had ties to the same trust. They were building a patchwork corridor, he said. Quiet purchases, forged transfers, all aimed at creating a contiguous path for a private road expansion. Once that was done, they'd apply for rezoning, cash out with a developer, and disappear. "And my gate?" I asked. "Your gate blocked the last piece they needed. Without it, the corridor ends in the woods." Now I understood why they'd been so desperate. They weren't just trying to bully a neighbor. They were trying to salvage a fraudulent scheme that had likely already lined a few pockets. 2 days later, federal agents served search warrants at 3 properties belonging to people tied to the HOA and the trust. One was a lawyer in another city. Another was a former land surveyor. The third was Karrenna's cousin, who had apparently been the one forging most of the signatures, including mine. The fallout came fast. Bank accounts associated with the HOA were frozen. The remaining board members, even those not directly involved, stepped down. The community voted to dissolve the association entirely, replacing it with a voluntary neighborhood council, no dues. No enforcement authority, just a group of residents handling trash collection schedules and seasonal decorations. It wasn't utopia, but it was sane. Meanwhile, the DA brought formal charges against 8 individuals across 3 counties. At the state level, they faced conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false instruments, and criminal impersonation. Federally, the Big 3, Karrenna, her cousin, and the shell company's agent were indicted for wire fraud and interstate racketeering. The trial was scheduled 6 months out. I testified in the preliminary hearing. The judge, a sharp-eyed man who didn't tolerate nonsense, asked me one question after I presented the forged quitclaim deed. "Did you ever sign this document?" "No," I said. "And if I had, it wouldn't look like someone signed it with their non-dominant hand in the back of a speeding van." That got a laugh from the gallery. Not from the defense table. When the hearing concluded, the judge denied bail for the primary defendants. The others were released under supervision, barred from contacting anyone in the neighborhood. And just like that, the grip Evergreen Bluffs HOA had on our community was over. The land was restored to my name, unchallenged. The county issued a permanent injunction preventing any future development along the old maintenance trail without a full environmental review and a unanimous vote from adjacent landowners. That included me, and I had no intention of ever saying yes. The gate stayed locked. The camera stayed live. But I added something new. A solar-powered light installed above the gate with a motion detector. Not because I expected anyone to come sneaking around again, but because it made me feel like the road was finally mine without question, without threat, without compromise. On a warm Saturday in late spring, the neighborhood held a celebration. Not a festival, not a parade, just a gathering. Kids drew chalk murals on the sidewalks, someone grilled hot dogs, a band of teenagers played bluegrass covers under a pop-up canopy. People smiled without looking over their shoulders. June, the woman who'd proposed dissolving the HOA, sat next to me at one of the folding tables. She held a paper plate stacked with coleslaw and barbecue ribs. "I was wrong about you," she said. I thought you were just one of those guys who doesn't like rules. I don't like bad rules, I said. Good ones are fine. And what do you call a locked gate that nobody can open? I looked toward the end of the road where it disappeared into the tree line. Peace of mind. She nodded once, then went back to her ribs. Later that evening, I walked the perimeter of my property, not out of habit, but because I wanted to. The woods were quiet again. No distant rustling, no crunch of feet on gravel that shouldn't be there. At the far edge, where the woods thickened and the air smelled like pine needles and old bark, I stopped. I remembered the day I bought the land years ago. It had been an afterthought at the time, just a strip of forgotten dirt and trees. But it turned out to be the one thing worth protecting the most. Not because it was valuable to me, but because it was valuable to people who didn't deserve it. Now, it was more than mine. It was saved from becoming a shortcut, a loophole, a stepping stone for people who didn't care what they broke as long as they got through. Back at the house, I poured a glass of iced tea and sat on the porch. The lights from the park flickered in the distance. I could hear laughter. Dogs barking, free, happy, unticketed dogs. No more notices. No more threats in plastic sleeves. No one lurking with clipboards, just neighbors, just home, and one very well-locked gate.